Mike Chapman, as a sculptor, I think you've got a particular story, a particular experience around Christmas and the child. I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, well, it's quite a story, really. Back in 99, just before the millennium, I was teaching on Portland, teaching stone carving as a summer job, and one of the people that came along to the course was a lady from the congregation of St Martin in the Fields in London. Very sweet girl.
Well, that's the big church right by Trafalgar Square.
That's the big one, yeah. And it's like on the edge of the Strand and Trafalgar Square. And they got together, a group of the congregation got together and decided they would elect one of their people to come down to Portland to learn how to carve a sculpture in honour of the millennial celebrations. And it was a rather, shall we say, over-ambitious plan. She was there for a week learning. Do you know, in a week I can teach the basic school tool skills. So you could maybe carve a number for your house plate or whatever, or a bowl, but not really Michelangelo's David.
Yeah, they were hoping for a bit more than
they were hoping for Michelangelo's David. So we had a good tussle that week while I explained this to her, and she was very nice person. I took to her and I thought it'd be great if I could help. So at the end of it, I don't know what she'd made, some little bowl or something like that. And she was all right, but you know, she recognised by that time that she wasn't going to be able to do this. And I said, well, if you get into any trouble, give me a call and I'll see if I can help you. So a few weeks later, a tribe of people came down from St Martin's, including one of the vicars, who was a guy called David Monteith. Very, very lovely people. And they asked me if I could help. And they hadn't even got a clue what they wanted to do, but they wanted to have something to replace the traditional nativity that is placed in Trafalgar Square for Christmas, and it being the anniversary of the birth of Christ. So it was a bit of a hobby horse of mine, because I got a bit narky about the fact that all the industrial bods in the country were suddenly proclaiming the millennium as being about them. So it was kind of a celebration of the Ford Motor Company or Hoover or whatever you like that was donating money. And I never heard a mention of Christ, and I thought, they're missing the point here a bit. I'm not actually particularly a working Christian, but I love the idea of God and Christ and all the rest of it, and I thought we should be celebrating the birth.
So what did you come up with?
Well, I suggested that we should just do a tiny baby to go in the middle of all that madness in London, right between the lions, right under the big Nelson's column, a life-size baby that would proclaim the innocence of the child that had been born as a gift to us. And they thought that was great. So they ran off to get the things organised, and they gave me the commission, which I thought was fabulous. And as we were parting, the lady in question said that she was pregnant.
This is the one who'd come down for the week's course.
Yeah. I think it was during my first visit up to London to talk to them. She met me from the station to show me the way, and I said to her something like, "You're looking very well," as we do in English. And she said, "Actually, I'm pregnant." And I went, "Oh, that's amazing. You couldn't manage to have a boy, could you?" And she did. And the boy child, Tobias Wood, Taylor Wood, I think was their name, was born a week before I was due to start. And he was a beautiful little child, and I went down to their home in Hertfordshire, took photographs of him, measured him. So he is, whether he likes it or not, this poor guy who's now walking around 24 years old, he is that naked baby. He is the Christ child in every way. And so from that I procured a 4.5 ton block of Portland stone, which is quite big. It's as tall as a man, more or less nearly 6 foot tall. And in the top of it I carved a nest of rock with a tiny, tiny baby, life size. Because you couldn't just leave a stone carving of a baby on the ground in Trafalgar Square, it would be gone in a minute. nobody's going to nick this 4.5 ton block of stone.
Right.
And it also has a bit of presence. So during the process, it's very much a go as you feel thing, sculpture. Things emerge and evolve while you're working. And somehow I got the idea of including an umbilical cord that would run into the stone, so that it was as though the baby was coming from the earth, from the stone, like it was a gift to us. And that's how the baby evolved. And then later on, they came up with the line from the Bible: "In the beginning was the Word, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Yeah. John, I think, something. And they invited me back to carve those words all the way around the block, which I had a delightful week in the middle of London madness, sitting on a little fishing stall, carving the letters quietly on my own, trying to ignore all the passers-by.
And the block was out in Trafalgar Square in the beginning, and then
it started off in the beginning. It was literally between two of the big lions, and it was facing the church, and it did look really tiny. I'm glad it was on a 4.5 ton block, because it was so diminished by the grandeur of that area. And so, it started out there that first night, and I remember driving away. It had become like my baby by that time. And there'd been cranes and massiveness involved in putting it in there. And I felt bereft. I walked away from it with my then girlfriend, and I said, I've got a feeling I'm never going to see that again, because it just looked so vulnerable. Yeah. But in fact, it was that air of vulnerability that made it work. But, people often were reduced to tears when they saw it. So I kind of got lucky with that idea in a way. Everything about it seemed to touch people. And of course it was still there a few weeks later, when they decided that it went in just before Christmas, and it was there for the Christmas celebrations. They do a huge thing with the bishop and millions of candles and choirs and things. It was really lovely, beautiful. And they involved me in it, which was really good. The bishop, in fact, I was just in the crowd, and they came out of the church on their way down to the square. And I was feeling slightly forgotten, but I mean, that often happens with egos and art. And as they walked past, the bishop, I can't remember his name now, but he was that grand fellow with the big beard and the frightening face with the flying eyebrows.
Richard Charters,
that's the guy. Yes. And as he walked past, he said, "You're coming with us." And he just grabbed me by the shoulder, and I was in the group that were marching down with the choirs. And he stood practically with his arm around me, making the speech all the way through, and commanding London to take care of this child. And I bet they did. He was that sort of geezer. So it was wonderful. And a few days after Christmas, well, in a couple of days after Christmas, before New Year, they very wisely removed it from the square, up the steps of the church, to the entablature by the front door.
And you can still see it there.
There it
it's
remains.
outside the church.
Yeah. And I'm really honoured. I mean, it's a fabulous place to have a piece of work. Initially, they were given permission to keep it there for 5 years. And it's become really part of the church. It's become very popular, a much loved icon really in London. And I don't think it'll ever leave now. It's just there. So it's wonderful for me.
And I gather there's a little bit of a sequel. When you had to maintain it.
Yeah, well, it's not all glamorous being a sculptor. A lot of the time it's not glamorous. It's dirty, and sometimes, particularly with stone work, it can be cold and dispiriting. And I'd had quite a run of cold and dispiriting work during a period about a year after it had gone in. I got a call from the church, who were becoming like mates really. They're nice people. And one of them called me up and said, "Look, we've got a real problem. Somebody had spilt a sticky drink on the Christ child, maybe beer or Coke or something like that. Because of the high sugar content, it had attracted soot. Yeah. So there was this great dark patch across it. And they were scared to clean. I mean, all we do, I'll let you into the secret, is soap and water. And I said, you just get a scrubbing brush and you can scrub it off. And they said, no, we daren't do it. And on top of that, somebody had graffitied their little tag sign on the base of the big stone, bless them. So in the end they said, look, we'll do your fare and everything if you'll come down and do it for us. And so I reluctantly said, okay, I will then. And it was the middle of winter. And I wasn't having a great time at that time anyway, and I was feeling a bit low about what I was doing. And I caught a train at about 6 in the morning from Dorchester, all the way down to London, got out with all the crowds going off to their city jobs. And just for a bit of background, very briefly, I used to be a hotshot ad man, and I spent my life in the middle of London, eating at the Ivy and all that kind of nonsense.
That's jazz.
Yeah. And so when I got there, I was feeling a little bit humiliated by my new situation. You know, I was in disgusting old wet clothes, waterproof trousers, a horrible old anorak thing and a woolly hat. And I thought, please God, don't let anybody from my old life see me, because I was scrubbing stone. And it was icy cold, and I was frankly really fed up.
Yeah.
I wasn't enjoying this little favour I had to do for them at all. And I spent most of the morning, I cleaned the baby quite quickly, and that was all right. But this wretched hooligan who put a graffiti tag on the base, that took some shifting. And I spent quite a lot of time down on my knees doing it. And while I was down there, I'm given to the odd prayer, usually quite selfish. And this one was, and I just said, look, I'm really fed up today. I feel really low about myself, and I feel sad that I've come down to just scrubbing a piece of stone. What's going on? Can you help? And at that point, I finally got through scrubbing this piece of graffiti, and I stood up rather creakily, got to the top of the block, and looking across it to the outside of the fenced area, believe this or not, Jesus was standing about 4 feet away from me on the other side of the block, with his hands out looking at me like this. And he was 6'4". I don't know what the original one was, but this guy was tall and beautiful. He had this amazing dark hair, beard, beautiful serene face, and he was smiling at me. And weirdly, he didn't think I was the cleaner. He thought I was the sculptor, and he said, did you do this? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, it's amazing. Still gets me now when I remember it. It was just like, it was literally like God saying, you're not so rubbish after all, pal.
Is this a vision?
It felt like a vision. I was blown away. I mean, I assumed it was Jesus, because I'm that kind of nut. Anyway, this guy then said, wait there. I didn't notice at that point that he'd got an LA accent, but I waited, and he came right the way around through this fenced area, came back, and he was really impressive. He had the robes, sandals, and all the dignity and everything. A little old lady came up and touched him on his way to me and walked off almost in tears. I mean, it was amazing. And then he came over and gave me a massive hug, and he said, do you mind if I take a photograph? So I said, no, I don't mind at all. And so
he never says that in the Gospels.
No. And from his robe, he pulled out a posh modern camera. And so he's got his arm around me, and he's got his huge long arm out here taking a photograph. And then I said, could you take one for me as well, please? And so he said, sure, I can. So I gave him my phone, and he reached out and he took a photograph. And later that night, I was back home. I mean, he saved my day. I was elevated more than I can tell you. And when he left after 20 minutes or so, we got on really well, and he explained what he was doing. And what he was doing was that he was a fool for Christ. That's what they call themselves. And they're people who spend their lives doing exactly what he'd done that morning, making people feel good. And they travel around the globe, and they just, I don't know how they get employed or whatever, but he'd been hired oddly enough, by a London ad agency, which is exactly the kind of animals that I used to work for. And boy, had he made me feel good that day. I was so proud of what I did. I went home on cloud 9. I was very, very privileged to have met him. A couple of years later, my son, who lives in LA, one of my sons, phoned me up, and he said, I've got sad news for you, Dad. And I said, what's that? And he said, I've just seen an article in the LA Times. Jesus is dead. And this guy had died quite young, probably in his late 40s. But he sure as hell saved my life that day and my sanity, and I'm very grateful for it. And that was the story.
Thank you so much. It's quite a story, really.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you for asking. And there's been so many of them, it never stopped. I mean, people have just been so sweet all the time. You don't often get a really great feedback to work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you do it, you place it, probably don't see it again. But something about that one has just really, it's really touched me, the way people have reacted to it. A woman was seen spending the whole day there, and the curate was getting concerned for her because she looked distressed, and he went out and asked her what she was doing. And she explained that she was childless, and she'd heard that if she spent time with this baby, she could get pregnant. And I was really moved to learn that, you know. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, maybe it actually helped her somehow, but you know, the important thing is that people can believe that about a piece of stone. And it's changed a lot of people's attitudes, you know. It's the simplicity and the vulnerability that they're reminded of, which is the whole point of the story of Christ to me, which is that, you know, it became flesh. He was a humble human being born in the worst circumstances imaginable, like the modern day equivalent of Gaza, and somehow he came to change the world. And I think that's, if there's a little bit of that coming out of that sculpture, I'll be quite happy if I never did anything else, really. That'd do me.
Thank you.
My pleasure.